Afternoon, and for those in Myanmar, Mingalabar. My name is Clay O'Brien and I'm a member of the Chapter Committee of AIDEN, the Australian International Development Network. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the First Nations owners of the lands where we are located. I am on Camaragal land and I pay my respects to their people and elders, past, present and emerging. AIDEN's message is simple: more and better giving and impact investing from Australia for international development. One of the ways we are encouraging that is by showcasing and amplifying the work and issues in the sector. And there can hardly be a more pressing issue today than the situation in Myanmar. Thank you all for tuning in to listen to our briefing today. The current situation in Myanmar is devastating and close to my heart. I had been working in Myanmar for the last 2 years in the field of microfinance until returning 2 months ago. We have a lot to cover in the session today, so let's dive right in. The Q&A and chat functions will be operating today, so please send through your questions as they come to mind. Anna will be moderating the questions and we'll do her best to get to them in the last 15 minutes or so. I would like to introduce Anna Demant. Anna is the Foundation Manager at Planet Wheeler and will be facilitating our session.
Well, thanks very much, Clay. I'm here talking to you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Yeah, as Clay said, we're all here today because 3 months ago, the Myanmar military, or the Tatmadaw, brutally overthrew the democratically elected National League for Democracy party led by Aung San Suu Kyi, with whom they'd been in a power share arrangement. Since then, the military have arrested thousands of people. They've killed over 750 people and thousands more have fled to the border regions or gone into hiding. Martial law is in place in most cities with very little freedom of movement. A note, today we'll be referring to the country as both Myanmar and Burma, alternatively. Myanmar is the name bestowed on the country by the military in the late 80s. Burma is the name preferred by most ethnic groups. So, Clay, you were there on the streets as the coup broke out. Can you give us a bit of a picture of what that looked like, what it felt like? You said initially it was quite a positive feeling.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, at around 7 on the morning of Monday, February the 1st, I received a group WhatsApp message that simply said, Aung San Suu Kyi has been detained, be careful. However, you're right, the first weeks were more like carnival than a coup. Massive groups of people gathered at all the major landmarks, such as the Sule Pagoda, and paraded through the streets singing and dancing. And they came from across society, young, old, men, women, actors and trade unionists, Burmese and minority ethnic groups. Every night in my building and throughout the country, they banged pots and pans in rhythmic protest just before the 8 p.m. curfew imposed after the coup. And volunteers were everywhere, providing food and drink, as is always the case in Myanmar. It has been ranked the second most generous country by the World Giving Index over the last 10 years. Within a few days, people were refusing to work. Initially, government employees at hospitals, teaching institutions, and government offices. But soon this so-called civil disobedience movement had extended to all areas, including transportation, construction, and the financial sector. The banks have been shuttered now in Myanmar for nearly 3 months. Leadership came from a diverse number of groups, operating effectively through virtual VPNs and smartphones, as the military disrupted the internet and blocked sites such as Facebook. Even NGOs and development agencies were affected by the CDM. And now the economy is in free fall, and there is a severe risk of Myanmar, a country of 55 million people, becoming a failed state. So inspiring as the protests were, I always had this hollow feeling, knowing how the military had responded in the past. And by the second week, after the comparatively gentle police presence, many of the Tatmadaw's 400,000 soldiers were moved into Yangon, Mandalay, and other cities. My taxi driver to the airport told me that the police at the barricade were actually disguised soldiers. So I left Myanmar on 20 February, and now, like many of you, watch on in horror. Today, we'll hear from and about a range of brave people on the ground. They are facing dangers every day in their fight for democracy. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from the panel, and will now hand back to Anna.
Thanks, Clay. And that's certainly a really potent symbol, the idea of you in that taxi and seeing that person who in fact was a member of the military and in disguise. Today's session, there's so much, as Clay said, that we could potentially focus on, but we're choosing to really drill down to 3 key issues and questions. How is this coup and this uprising different, and how does it build on what's happened in the past? What are people at the coalface asking for and experiencing? And how can we, crucially, how can we in Australia assist at all? So I'd like to start with some context by introducing Tony Wheeler. He's known, I think, to most of you as the co-founder with his wife, Maureen, of Lonely Planet Publications. And he's also my boss. He's the founder of Planet Wheeler Foundation. Tony, tell us about the first time that you went to Burma and what your impressions were, and why you ended up deciding to include Burma in your book, Badlands, A Tourist on the Axis of Evil.
Well, I first went to Burma, it's well over 40 years ago now, in 1974. And I've been back every decade since, some decades more often than others, but from 74 onwards. And most recently, I was there in 2017. And then I was just across the border in Bangladesh, in amongst the Rohingya refugee camps in 2018. So my contact has been quite frequent and for quite a long time. But I've got to defer to the experts here. I am certainly no expert on Burma or Myanmar. I'm more an observer than someone who's really involved with it, as a number of the people in this panel are today. My first visit, I was just amazed by the place, because at that time it really was cut off from the outside world. That was during the Ne Win era, the first of the Tatmadaws' many dictators. And you know, it was a very strange place, and I think it was really ignored by the outside world. I think later on, when we published at Lonely Planet a series of guidebooks to Burma and then Myanmar, and later on we got a lot of flack for publishing it. People were saying, you know, well, you shouldn't be doing this because you'd be encouraging people to go there, and that's not a good thing, which I disagreed with. I think that people going to a place and seeing it for themselves makes an enormous difference. You never really get a true story of a place from sitting in front of a television screen far, far away. So I've always believed in going and seeing it. But really, over the years, it's a country that's just gone up and gone down and up and down. And right now, it's definitely going down again. And it's a sad story to see.
Yeah. But when you went back, you revisited the book Badlands in 2007. I think you went back in 2010, right, to revisit. Yeah. At the time, you had this sense of optimism that there was a sense of change in the air.
Yeah, it was, you know, and there's no question. There's been lots of changes over the years. And you know, that first visit in '74, and when I went back again a couple of years later, it was just completely separated from the you know, none of the brands you see anywhere else, and many of them you still don't see in Myanmar. But you know, the cars all dated from World War II. It was a very strange place to visit, and I think it's because it had so little impact on the outside world was the reason it was ignored so much. And we did Badlands, which was a book visiting the countries that were on President Bush's axis of evil, and a bunch of other countries which I felt had in some ways either been labeled as bad countries, or no question in my mind that they were bad countries. And I put Burma, Myanmar in there, essentially not because it was a country that was fomenting terrorism in other places, or threatening to invade its neighbor or anything. It was basically oppressing its own citizens. And if you went back to the Ne Win era, a lot of that was just through bad economic management. You know, the Burmese road to socialism, I always thought it was really as the Burmese road to financial ruin. It was a crazy economic path. And you know, that may not have affected people the way later on the military tended to affect people, but nor was it a good thing. So I've seen that bad side of Burma come and go. And that definitely, well, in 2010, things did look better. Aung San Suu Kyi was out of house arrest. The world was looking up. And we really felt, you know, well, okay, the military is going to insist that it still keeps its fingers on a lot of the controls, but they were going to relax, going to loosen up. And in a way, they did for a while. And then, as things tend to in that country, it all went haywire again.
Yeah, I'd like hello.
Hi, Phil. Nice to see you. Phil Thornton is the founder of Karen News and a journalist in his own right, formerly with the Bangkok Post. I was going to introduce you, Phil, with a reflection on something Tony said in the past. And one of his agendas when he did write Badlands was to really show that actually, you know, Burma has this repressive military government. But at the end of the day, the people are ordinary people trying to get on with their lives. And the concept of an axis of evil, whichever countries you include in that, is always going to ignore that fact. Phil, you've worked extensively with the Karen people, and I'd like to invite you now to have a conversation with Noor Tamlasore, who's joining us from the Karen Women's Organisation. Tamlasore is a leader of Karen Women's Organisation and is on the ground right now on the Thai-Burma border, working to address the fact that thousands of people are fleeing to that border. She's tireless and also a good friend. And my heart goes out to people working on the border at the moment and the kind of conditions that you're dealing with. Phil, you've worked with the Karen people for a long time. Can you give us your perspective on the situation?
Yeah, well, I suppose the last 20 years I've spent working as a journalist on the Thai-Burma border and made a lot of crossings in that time, mostly under the Karen visa, which would probably be illegal under the Burmese legal. But, you know, there was changes and there was reforms, but they didn't benefit all of the people, especially the ethnic people. I mean, while Hillary Clinton was in Yangon in 2012, and that famous photograph of her greeting Suu Kyi, around the same time, the Kachin people were getting smashed to the tune of about 100,000 were made displaced. I was up there at the time, and they were not prepared for it because they had 17 years of ceasefire, unlike the Karen, who have continually had to deal with displacement. The people in the Kachin state were really struggling. It was cold, it was winter, and, you know, there was, you know, 8, 10, 15 people to a 6 meter square bamboo room. Yeah. So there was lots of struggles. So over that period of time, the displacement has continued within the ethnic states. Things changed in the cities, except, you know, journalists were still being persecuted, and there was obscure laws brought in, very vague, that locked them up. But, you know, and workers, I think it took 2 years to reach an agreement to give workers $3.75 as the daily wage. That didn't exclude 10-hour days or 6 days weeks. So for some, things had changed well, and for many people, things hadn't changed, especially in the ethnic areas. And Tunu, with the Karen Women's Organisation, and Manny Muang and Pamun would have, you know, first-hand experience of that.
Phil, what I'll do now is share some photos that Noor Tamlasore, or Tunu, as we call her, has provided us with, and invite you to have a conversation with her about what we can see in those photos.
So our webinars happening now?
It sure is. Yep. 140 people tuning in and hearing everything that we're saying. So
that's the obvious question.
I'm going to share this PowerPoint and just go to slideshow, play from the start. And if you could have a conversation now with Tamla about what you can see, that would be fantastic.
Tamla Saw Tunu is the same person. So if I split between Tamla Saw and Tunu, I'm not having a breakdown. Tunu, we can see people there, or children actually. Now there's an adult and a child using water, which is something we all take for granted. But when you're displaced, clean water is not a given. What is the situation like now in Karen State for people?
Good. Before I reply to the question, I would like to say good morning to everyone, and thanks to Anna and Planner Wheeler Foundation for giving me this opportunity to share information with you all. I would like to share you the story of about an internally displaced person crying and asking for water, and how a simple thing like access to drinking water is so difficult for the internally displaced person. One night, my colleague in the field sent me a short video message of her small children crying and asking for drinking water. I told her, why not give the drinking water to the children? Why are you letting them cry? She said that the mother told her children that they don't have any more drinking water, as no one dared to go down to the side of the river because they are afraid that the Burma army will shoot them. Here in this picture, in this photo, you can see a girl is helping her mother to store some drinking water so they can use it for a few days. This is why they are doing that. It's not easy to get water to drink when you are hiding from the Burma army soldiers.
Yeah, another point to that too. I remember about 2016 interviewing a young woman, a young girl, 9 years of age, who has missing a leg. And I asked her what was the situation. She was in an IDP camp too. And her response was, I was hungry for water, so I ran to the river and stepped on a landmine. So they have those considerations as well. It's not just you can wander freely or forage for food. You have to consider landmines.
Yes. Landmine is always a problem for many, many decades in IDP or rural of the current area.
Tunu, IDP is internally displaced people, yes?
People, yes.
Yeah, or another way of looking at it is people forced from their homes. They've usually been bombed out of their houses, and they take refuge in jungles or mountain areas. In this photograph here, we can see that people have pots and they've got basins for food, but when people are newly displaced, they can't take any of that with them.
Some of them, like violence from the Burma army is not a new thing from the ethnic people. And then since last year, the attack of the Burma army to the current, ethnic current area is getting worse and worse. And then people always have to keep alert. They always have to flee from time to time. So some of the family, they will be able to grab some of the pots and plates, but there are also some of the families that they cannot bring anything with them. They just run by themselves to escape from the shooting. And also maybe in your country, when you heard of the airplane, it might not be like a strange thing for you, but in our area, if we heard of airplane, the sound of the airplane is like a nightmare for us. So people will run they are getting afraid and they will run. And then if you look at this picture, this grandma, she cannot run by herself. She always, there has to be someone in the family have to carry her. So like when she has to run back and forth from many times, and she just told her family that just leave me, I am too tired. If I have to die, I would die. I am so tired of everything. So like you can see how insecure and how danger the life of internally displaced people are living in.
Yeah. And it's not just the old, is it, Tunu? It's also heavily pregnant women.
Yeah, yes.
Children, babies, you know, they have to be carried as well.
Yeah. Most of the time when the there is fighting broke out, or even the shelling of the mortars, children and women will be like the one who has to run first. And then in the picture, you will see how scared they are. And I also would like to share that as I am speaking to you now, we already heard that there will be airstrike today, but we don't know. But for the past 2 days, yesterday and like 28th April, and then yesterday 29th April, there are already more than 6 times airstrike in the area that these IDP are fleeing. And then now they also have to, last night they have to cross to the Thai side for their own safety. But to cross to the Thai side also, it's not always safe for them, because they always often asked by the Thai soldiers to go back. They will always push back to the Thai side, because Thai soldier will say that, oh, there is no big fighting, you can go back. And then where there is big fighting, you can come back. Something like that. So it's really, if you look at in this picture, you will see like a group of internally displaced people crossing to the Thai side, and then on the back you will see the Thai soldier there. They ask these people to come back where they don't feel safe to come back. And hiding in the forest mean like you have to sleep under the stone or in the cave or in the holes, which is very difficult for children, and also like pregnant women, and also newborn babies, newborn mother. Yesterday, I got a phone call from my colleague saying that as soon as we heard the sound of the airplane, we are not in a hiding, but there are two pregnant women and one newborn woman that they cannot run. So like people are having difficulty to have to try to carry them to a safe place. But even they are in the hiding place, the atmosphere is not, how to say, like the temperature, because people have to hide in the hole. So like it's kind of getting hot, and some of the women, they feel like they are nearly fainting. So like we just heard about that, and then it's like we feel bad that we cannot be there to really help them, like physically.
Just on that point, Tunu, when you have pregnant people, women and other people, even with food, there's a risk if you light fires that will make it a target for Burmese army's mortars and artillery attacks, because they will see the smoke and they can align the shots on that. So being pregnant or about to give birth is very difficult if you don't have hot water.
Yes, hot water, and also like access to basic food like green vegetable, as you already mentioned. Even if we are like they are in the hiding place, but they have to be very carefully with moving around to the areas, because of Lehman, and also because of they don't know where are the Burma army, like when they will come up. they don't know, so they have to be very careful with everything surrounding them.
Tunu, would you be able to tell us what exactly KWO is asking for at the moment? You are asking for support.
Yes. Currently, yes. Currently, KWO, we work together with other Korean community-based organizations to respond to the emergency needs for these internally displaced people. And then we also set up the emergency response team. And then for KWO, we focus more on providing needs, materials needs, focusing for the women and children. We provide them with the women's sanitary pads. We also water filters for the cleaning water and special nutritious package for the vulnerable people like a pregnant woman, newborn baby, elderly, and people who are sick. We also give the main food like rice, basic thing like rice and some dry food to the
Hello?
Oh, we seem to have lost you, Tamla So. But what I will say now is thank you very much for filling us in. I'm not sure if you can still hear us. We will be distributing the PowerPoint with text to support it after this. I'd like to also note, just briefly, I'd like to note that Jessica Nakum from Kachin Women's Association Thailand planned to be with us today, but over the last few days, her ability to access the internet became increasingly interrupted, and it was impossible to even have a couple of sentences in conversation with her today. So she has sent a video, which I will be distributing to everyone. Essentially, she'd like you all to know that the situation in Chin State, which is on the border with China, is just like it is elsewhere in the country, with arbitrary arrests and brutal crackdowns. Quite evocatively, she shared with me that she was quite relieved that one of her staff members who was recently arrested is a man, not a woman, because if you're a woman, there's no doubt there'll be sexual violence involved in your arrest. And the Kachin Women's Association Thailand, Quat and KWO, Tamla Soa's group, have documented this, as have other groups in the past. So for Jessica on the border, she's also has an emergency appeal wanting support. They've got a primary healthcare focus and are looking for basic healthcare support for now over 15,000 internally displaced people, 1,000 of whom are really new to those camps. To give you an example, they've trained over 60 first aid volunteers. They've provided them with emergency backpacks, so really basic stuff, sleeping bags, mosquito nets, plastic sheets, hats, dry food, and so on. And these people are then going out to support others. And Quat has a great track record in this regard in terms of training up local people and then simply providing technical support because they train them so well. So I'll certainly be sending around information about Quat and KWO after this.
Anna, can I add a footnote to the displacement?
Yeah, sure.
Well, at the moment, the monsoon season's about to hit, and that's 24/7 rain. And it'll be incredibly difficult. All the access roads, which are easy, not easy, but you can access with four-wheel drive, will turn to mud, which will make it incredibly difficult. It means the rice and all the other supplies will have to be carried in. It'll also bring dengue, malaria, and dysentery. If, and the need for medicines and mosquito nets and repellent and mats will be of utmost importance.
Thanks for that, Phil. Someone who absolutely gets the urgency of the situation is Pa Mun. Pa Mun is joining us from Melbourne. He's a global leader in the diaspora Chin group. He's from the Chin State, which borders India in Burma, and his particular ethnic group is the Zatong group from central Chin State. Pa Mun, you're an academic by training, but most of your time is spent focused on supporting peace and democracy in Burma. You're a driving force behind the BDSM, Burma Democratic Support Network, and very supportive of the civil disobedience movement that Clay spoke about earlier. Parmun, how is this particular situation, this coup and uprising, different than, and how does it build upon what's happened in the past? You're a member of the 88 generation. So the group of people, young people, students, you're an assistant lecturer at the time who were involved in an uprising in 1988. How is what's happening now different? You've told me there's 4 main reasons it's different.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Eden, for organizing this event, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, as myself, 1988 generation, so I can come up with 4 key differences between 88 uprising and now we call Spring Revolution 21. Maybe I just call 88 and 21. Number 1 is the role of social media. So anyone with mobile phone in the hand can become a reporter. So ordinary citizens film, recorded, and post it to social media. In that way, they inform the whole world what happening in Burma. And also, I think it deters some of maybe potential brutality by military force, but they know, they are aware that social media is dangerous. And that is the main difference. So in 1988, no such thing. So I think this social media is really helping our cause. And the second one is in 1988 uprising led thousands, maybe tens of thousands of civilians fled to neighboring countries, to Thailand, to India, to Malaysia. And many of them proceed to migrate to Western countries like Australia and US and Europe as refugees. And now a significant number of diaspora Burmese communities are very strong and important supporters for democracy movement happening in Burma and supporting financially, morally, at the same time lobbying our respective governments. In 1988, there were not many Burmese people, especially in the West. So when I call Burmese, all the people from Burma, so they include all the ethnic group. And the third one, the real different also, the international support. The international support for the movement now is much more greater than 1988 uprising. I guess is held by social media. I won't elaborate further on that. Neither I can go on. And the fourth one, I think is more important and the most significant one is the so-called civil disobedience movement, and which was started by a group of medical doctors. The idea is all the government or private sector employees refusing to work to cripple the regimes, the government. So about 70% of employees from government and different sector and private sector participating in this we call CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement. That really, I think, powerful and almost cripple. As a result, just now the Phil and Clay mentioned, banks are closed, schools, hospitals, and many business private stores are stopped or closed. So that is very different from 1988 uprising. Of course, in 1988, many employees from government and private sector did stop working, did participate in public demonstrations. but there was no like organized, well-organized CDM movement or civil disobedience movement. No such term. We don't have any idea, no idea. So when the military regime cracked down and crushed the uprising, everything stopped because no organized program or plan. And that is, I think, the main reason. And now, this civil disobedience movement, the participants took the risk of losing their job, kicked out from their government housing or their accommodation, their quarters, or being arrested, or being killed. So they took their risk. And it is very important to sustain this movement because that is really, really strong and powerful and really hard the military regime. And the public are demonstrating might be, as you all notice, these few days, slow down. But the CDM movement, civil disobedience movement, is keep going. So they really cripple the regime, military regime. So we really need to sustain this movement and to defeat the military regime. But to do so, we need to support financially. We need to support financially. So many people had lost their job and lost home, were kicked out from their home, and many arrested, and many being killed, and thousands had fled to neighboring country. To many chains, about 3,000 people fled to Mizoram, India, is close to Chinstek, and many to Thailand, many to Kachin, and many thousand, maybe very big number, internally displaced within Burma. So maybe not in other countries, but they were displaced from their place, their home.
Pamun, I'll just interrupt you at this moment to introduce Manny Muang from Human Rights Watch, a long-form researcher with Human Rights Watch, who's published extensively as a journalist, Al Jazeera, CNN, and many others. In response to what Pamun's saying, people are literally putting their lives on the line here. They're stopping work. Their only means of support is thanks to the work of people like Pamun, who are organising the diaspora particularly and sending money. How can we in Australia help, and what is Human Rights Watch particular advocating on in regards to this?
Sure, and Pamun, sorry to cut you off. I'm going to support what you're saying basically because it is so on the point, you know, and I've written about this for Human Rights Watch as well, which is if we cripple the revenue to the military, we will cripple the military junta. And this is something that Myanmar people know from long experience. They've had to suffer through, you know, at least 5 decades of military rule. The last time that the military actually really came to the negotiating table was because they were so financially crippled and so reliant on China. They knew that they were hamstrung. They didn't have foreign currency. Myanmar people know this, and what they're saying is, instead of deliberating and taking our time on it, the international community should band together, should unite, and should act in a unified way to cut the revenue, cripple the military's income stream. So when we're talking about supporting the civil disobedience movement, it's not just, you know, charities and making sure that people are somehow getting support if they can flee. We're really trying to talk about honoring what the Burmese people are asking for, you know, acting in solidarity, because this is something that's so important. They really need to feel like the international community is behind them, because right now they're feeling pretty isolated, especially because of a recent ASEAN meeting on Myanmar. But really, when we're talking about advocating for crippling the military, these targeted sanctions at a you know, level where we're really cutting off the money streams and the income streams to key individuals within the military and their you know, military supported administration. This means that they can't pocket this anymore. And this also means that we're freezing their assets. So their offshore banking streams, you know, we're not talking about bank accounts in Myanmar, we're talking about bank accounts in the Caymans and in tax havens that Myanmar people will never benefit from. So instead of having these individuals and these key top military people be able to continue funding their own agenda, which is for military you know, power, then that means we can cut it off. And the quicker the better, because Myanmar people are just going to suffer more. And, you know, we're talking about humanitarian crisis that exist already on the borders. We're talking about people who have for decades been internally displaced. And now that pressure is going to be on those borders again, particularly as people flee from the interior to the outer. And Notamla talked a little bit about this, but you know, even in the last 2 weeks, we've had estimates of 20,000 people fleeing to the Karen Thai border, my family included. You know, I've got cousins who are part of the civil disobedience movement. They're young doctors. They've already been arrested a couple of times. They've had friends who've gone in and haven't been released. And we're hearing about things like torture, deaths in custody, arbitrary detentions. I mean, for the ASEAN summit to have happened, it's a little bit of a slap in the face for the civil disobedience movement and the people of Myanmar, because they're feeling really, really isolated. And if we continue to support, you know, this legitimacy of Min Aung Hlaing being able to act as the leader of a country where they haven't voted for him, it's a really dangerous line to walk, because this kind of gives an open door to the other regional partners. But the other question was, what can Australia do? And we haven't really done very much, unfortunately. So as the major economic power in this region, we haven't sanctioned the people that we've talked about, whereas the UK, Canada, the US, and much of the EU have. We also have cut military ties, but that was up for debate ever since the Rohingya crisis and, you know, the crimes against humanity committed against them. And many other ethnic minority people, as the UN fact-finding mission demonstrated. And going forward, we also need to consider sanctioning some of the military-owned enterprises. So these are the big conglomerates that have partnerships with Western partners, but are owned by military officials. Australia has a long way to go, and we really haven't even started from the beginning. So this is something that Human Rights Watch will continue to advocate for. I joined a joint standing committee meeting a couple of weeks ago in Canberra with many of my Burmese diaspora, and overwhelmingly, I think that it's fair to say that we are all pressing for Australia to really impose these targeted sanctions as our key allied partners have, and economic partners, and then also to extend that to the businesses that are owned by the military as well.
Thanks, Manny. I was planning to leave 15 minutes for questions, and we've got a lot of chat going now in the chat function. Before I do that, I just wanted to let you all know that there definitely will be links available to key groups, including KWO, Quat, Human Rights Watch, a link to Intrepid Travel's Myanmar appeal, and a note that KWO and Quat are both members of Partners for Equity. So if you donate to them, it's tax effective. So give away, you'll get a return back at tax time. And Human Rights Watch, of course. And then also Pamun has kindly shared with us further information about the BDSM, the Burma Democratic Support Network. And there's a bank account that you can give money to that will go to support people who are unable to work right now because they're part of the CDM. What I might do now is open up to questions, but I'll start with a question to you, Phil, and ask Clay, you to chime in as well. You're both really interested in the finance industry and how that's what's going on right now. Phil, you're in the middle of writing a book, in fact, about the Burmese military and their their finance, the way they finance themselves. Do you have any comments to add to what Manny and Pamun have said?
Yeah, it's all about the money. I mean, the regime have introduced different reforms themselves to protect their own interests. And that's, I think, one of the reasons for this coup, because there was going to be reforms initiated that stop them running as a private business. They're a cartel, basically. They've got 140 something companies that don't have to supply usual financial information to the authorities. They run blind. Years ago, it was worked out that when they took oil money, they exchanged it at the official rate was 6 kyat to the dollar, but the unofficial rate was about 1,200. So they were pocketing billions of dollars every year through that. Sanctions will work if everybody in the international community gets behind that. That includes ASEAN and other countries. Also, it should involve the oil companies because normally they get exempted, and that money is of critical importance to the military, the regime. It kept them going previously from 1990 up to 2010, their access to the oil money, because it doesn't come back into the country. It stays out. And I think Suu Kyi, from talking to one of her advisors, was quite prepared to let that go as long as money was brought in and it went into areas that might benefit the economy, etc., like building, etc. Yeah, so to reinforce what Manny and Pantum said, it's definitely the finance. It needs to be a universal sort of strategy to stop it. As one regional security agent said to me when I questioned him about it, he says the military's financial dealings is a black hole. Nobody really knows the amount they have, but we have seen evidence of it. I mean, many of the hotels and many of the cronies of former drug runners, they're on the axis of evil, Tony. You know, who was it? Stephen Law, who did run Traders Hotel, but runs Asia World, the docks, the entry into the country. He's a chief crony in jade mines and links to the family. Manny might have more up-to-date information on that. Manny? No? Yeah,
I have on the oil revenue, but not so much the jade mines. I mean, the oil stuff is mind-boggling. It's something like a $1 billion per annum revenue stream. And it's wholly owned by the Myanmar military, the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise, and it all goes offshore. So about 10% of even what is mined, the oil, I don't think that's the right word, extracted, sorry, goes to Myanmar for use, but 90% goes offshore, and 100% of that funding or the revenue streams go offshore. So it's absolutely mind-boggling how much money they're making.
Sorry, Manny, but often doesn't even come into the country.
Oh no, exactly.
Offshore.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's already one target, $1 billion right there.
The Global Witness estimated in 2014 the unprocessed jade was worth $31 billion. And many of the companies and licenses are owned by the military, families, and cronies. And I think some of the oil revenue is estimated as 46 times the country's health budget that's gone missing. Clay, you wanted to add?
Oh, look, we've got other questions, but I just maybe bring it back to the other end of the financial sector, which is where I work in microfinance. And in doing that, I really want to mention Sean Turnell, because when I first learned about microfinance 20 years ago at Macquarie Uni, he was a professor there. And I've never met anybody who was so enthusiastic and had such a love for Myanmar. So the fact that he's now being accused of spying is just horrendous. But his situation may also explain perhaps, I hear what Manny says about the Australian government. I think the deputy chairman of that committee described our response so far as constipated. But I think that perhaps Sean's position explains part of that. But just in terms of microfinance, I mean, In the last 4 or 5 years, the number of clients has increased from something like 1 million to 5 million. You now have 200 microfinance institutions. So I think there are two things to learn from that. One was incredible need that the banks were just not serving within Myanmar, and why microfinance was needed. But now with the coup and the civil disobedience movement, huge numbers of those, even microfinance institutions, are struggling because whilst they're not part of the mainstream banking sector, they need banks in order to move cash around the country to serve their clients. And they've got clients now whose businesses are failing. They have employees who want to join the civil disobedience movement, and they have a non-functioning banking sector. So as part of this failed state scenario I mentioned before, microfinance that was, an enabler in the past is now something that is creating, the lack of it is creating great hardship on top of all the sort of, the health issues and the physical threats that people are suffering.
Yeah, they basically own two banks, which they use conveniently to move their money around internationally. They have two banks one's run by MEC, Myanmar Economic Holdings, and the other one's MEHL, the two big corporations that they run, and each one has its own bank, which conveniently shifts the money about.
I think we could do a webinar on this subject alone. It points to the complexity of this issue and the depth. In fact, I'm looking at the chat function, and I'm thinking we could have created a whole new webinar out of some of the participants in the chat there, from Rowan Araf to Simon Lewis, Dave Rickards, and many others. There's a question from Simon that I'm going to ask you, Noor Tamlasor. And I'm also going to ask you a question from Claire Stein. The first is from Simon is there political pressure on the international NGOs, the bigger NGOs in Myanmar, and are some of them being banned from operating? Others might also have thoughts on this, so feel free to chime in. But first, Tamlasor, could you comment on Claire Stein's question? She's asking about the need to sustain the civil disobedience movement, which necessarily means doctors are not working, nurses are not working. However, what does that mean for people on the ground who are seeking health treatment? Do you have a comment on that, Tamlasor? Do you support the doctors leaving their positions, or how are your people dealing with this issue?
Thank you for the question. This is a very good question. The place where the current women organization working is mostly on the rural area. So it's like more of the rural area. So we don't have the government structure. I mean the regime structure in the place that we are operating. But to answer to your question, it is this civil disobedience movement is, I think it's a way to move forward. So it's one person, if the civil, like we cannot be sided like with the civilian, and also we cannot be also sided with the one who included in the movement. But for me, I think it is an opportunity, so we have to take on, because we cannot stay under the regime, even like we would like to get people in the field, like they want to get the treatment before the services is already poor. Because if you look at the country structure that they set up, the facility for the healthcare, it is like only 2 or 3% of the national budget, which never enough. And especially in the ethnic area, it's very difficult, because they will just come and set up the clinic without providing the nurse in the villages. And then the villagers there, we just have to find a way to get the treatment by our own expenses. So if it's the current, like if it's the rural area, it's not like as evident in the town. So I think Manny and other people will know more about the town situation.
Sure, I might extend that question to Pamun and Clay, but before I do that, are you seeing much, how is there political pressure on the international NGOs to continue operating in Myanmar, to
Yes.
stop operating? What
Yeah, yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. Because from what we know of, some of the international donors that's working with us, they also have to flee. So everyone's not only international NGO, but also community-based organization or journalists or every activist. Everyone is under the pressure. Everyone is under the danger. So everyone has to like take risk to do whatever we can in this difficult situation. It's everyone fight.
Yeah. Pamun, if you could talk very briefly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, what's your take on the idea that doctors are still needed both by the rich and the poor, particularly in the cities? How are you addressing that issue, which must have arisen for you and the movement? That question.
Recently, like BCDs in Rangoon, Mandalay, those who participate in the CDM movement, doctors, nurses, they run a private clinic. So the secret location, some mobile clinic, so the people can go and get the treatment. And of course, some private hospital that we see there. So if there is run by the doctors who participate in the CDM movement, they will treat people for free if those people are really in need. And as Kamalo saw mentioned, like my place in Chin State, the rural area, the government has assistance, is non-assistance, no hospital, nothing. So it doesn't matter this CDM happen or no. We don't have any Medicare or service. So, but only the big city we affect, but they do it their own way. So they have like secret location and they treat people in need. So I think they are doing their own way.
Okay, Clay, I'll turn to you now to conclude the session, but I think Phil's quote, "It's all about the money," is pretty much on the money. Clay, as you conclude, could you also comment on that idea of INGOs in Myanmar and whether they're being banned from operating and which ones are choosing to stay?
Yes, look, it's extremely difficult. I mean, Pamun mentioned the situation with doctors. I mean, they're continuing to work voluntarily, and then many of them are being arrested for doing so. I mean, to be frank, the healthcare system in Myanmar was one of the poorest in the world even before this. And now I think the situation is completely dire. I mean, one thing we don't hear about anymore is COVID-19. Vaccinations were actually starting in January, courtesy of the Indian government, but there's no more reporting of cases. I mean, the fear is that it's completely out of control now. I mean, as for NGOs, I work with some who I think are on this call, like Good Return and Graceworks. They're doing all they can. I mean, it's difficult. Just getting money in and out of the country now is extremely difficult. And all of the NGOs and right up to the development agencies like the UN and the LIFT Fund that I worked for in 2012, 2013, they're now having to refocus completely all their activities because they can't do anything that has any connection with government. So they're focusing on humanitarian needs. And of course, there are a lot of humanitarian needs. So people are really just having to adjust what they do, but they're working as well as they can, despite the fact that you have a civil disobedience movement where people feel it's their duty not to be working. But that, of course, then has a negative impact in many parts of the economy. Finance and healthcare, education is another area. Teachers haven't been teaching since February last year. So the country is just suffering on so many fronts.
Thanks, Clay. Thanks very much for the session today. It certainly was a really rich session. We'll be writing up notes, we'll be sending through links, and we'd like to continue this conversation. So please stay posted and join us in sending our very best wishes to you, Nor Tamla Saw, and to Jessica, who can't be with us today, Pamun and Manny, and your family. We'll be thinking of your family too. And it's definitely critical times. It's a crisis, and thank you all for tuning in. We deeply appreciate it. The recording will be available on the website within the next few days. Thank you everyone for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.